I was standing at my kitchen sink, washing the breakfast dishes, when my son walked in, holding a piece of paper that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. The morning sun was streaming through the gauze curtains, casting dancing shadows across the worn linoleum floor of our modest ranch home. The familiar scent of coffee still lingered in the air, mixed with the lavender dish soap I'd been using for 20 years. Everything felt so ordinary, so peaceful, until I saw the expression on his face. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach drop. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, and I could see it was some kind of official document with a letterhead I couldn't quite make out from where I stood. "You're about to hear an unbelievable true story, so please like and subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. My name is Margaret Fisher. I'm 61 years old, and what happened next would test every bond our family had built over the decades." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands on the yellow dish towel, the same one my daughter Emma had given me 3 Christmases ago. The irony of that detail would hit me later. "What is it, David?" I asked my son, trying to keep my voice steady. David Fisher had always been my rock, the one who called every Sunday and helped me with the heavier chores around the house since his father passed 5 years ago. At 34, he had his mother's stubborn streak, but his father's gentle way of delivering difficult news. He set the paper on the scratched oak table where we'd shared thousands of meals as a family. "It's about Emma," he said, running his hand through his dark hair, the way he'd done since he was a nervous little boy. "Her therapist contacted me because I'm listed as her emergency contact." My heart began to pound as I sank into my usual chair, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that I kept meaning to fix. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in as David's words hung in the air between us. Emma, my 29-year-old daughter, had been distant lately, but I'd attributed it to her busy job at the marketing firm downtown. She'd been in therapy for about 6 months, something I'd actually encouraged after she mentioned feeling overwhelmed with work stress. "The therapist says Emma has been telling her that you emotionally abused her throughout her childhood," David said quietly, his brown eyes filled with confusion and pain. "She's claiming you were controlling, manipulative, and that you damaged her self-esteem permanently." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at the document, seeing phrases like emotional neglect and psychological trauma swimming before my eyes. The kitchen tiles beneath my feet seemed to shift, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the humming of the old refrigerator. "David, you were there. You lived in this house, too. Was I really that terrible?" My son reached across the table and covered my weathered hand with his own. His touch was warm and solid, anchoring me to reality. "Mom, this doesn't make sense to me either. Yes, you were strict sometimes, but abusive? I remember Emma always coming to you with her problems, sleeping in your bed during thunderstorms until she was 12, spending hours talking to you about everything." I closed my eyes and tried to think back through the years, searching my memory for moments that might have seemed harsh to a child. Had I been too demanding when she struggled with math homework? Too protective when she wanted to go to parties in high school? Too honest when she asked for my opinion about her choices? "I need to understand this," I said, standing up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. "There has to be more to this story. Emma wouldn't just make this up out of nowhere." That's when David mentioned our neighbor, Ruth Carmichael, who had apparently been having regular coffee visits with Emma over the past few months. Ruth lived in the blue house next door and had been our neighbor for over 15 years. She was a retired social worker, someone I'd considered a good friend and confidant, especially after my husband died. Ruth might have some insight, David suggested. Emma's been spending a lot of time over there lately, and Ruth has experience with family dynamics from her work. I nodded, grateful for any chance to make sense of this nightmare. Ruth had always been a thoughtful listener, and if Emma had been confiding in her, maybe she could help me understand where these accusations were coming from. But as I looked at that document again, seeing my daughter's name next to such hurtful allegations, I felt something cold settle in my chest. The morning light that had seemed so cheerful minutes before now felt harsh and exposing. Every family photo on the refrigerator, every Mother's Day card tucked behind magnets, every memory I treasured suddenly felt questionable. What if I had damaged my daughter without realizing it? What if the mother I thought I'd been was completely different from the one Emma remembered? But what I discovered next changed everything. The walk to Ruth's house felt longer than usual, even though it was just next door. David stayed behind to look through more of Emma's things, hoping to find some clue about when her memories of our family had shifted so dramatically. I knocked on Ruth's familiar blue door, my hands trembling slightly. When she opened it, her face immediately showed concern. "Oh, honey, you look terrible. Come in, come in." Ruth guided me to her kitchen table, the same spot where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. "Let me make some tea. Ruth, I need to ask you about Emma." I sat down heavily, watching her move around the kitchen with practiced ease. "David mentioned she's been coming by to see you." Ruth's movements slowed as she filled the kettle. "Yes, she has. Several times in the past few months." She turned to face me, and I could see something guarded in her expression that hadn't been there before. "What has she been telling you about me?" The words came out more bluntly than I intended, but I was beyond politeness now. Ruth set 2 cups on the table and sat across from me. For a moment, she was quiet, and I could see her weighing her words carefully. This was the woman who had brought me casseroles after my husband's funeral, who had watched my children grow up from over the fence, who had celebrated their graduations and achievements alongside me. "She's been struggling, that's clear," Ruth finally said. "She talks about feeling like she was never good enough, like she was walking on eggshells around you. She mentioned feeling criticized for everything from her grades to her appearance to her choices." My heart sank. "But Ruth, you know me? You've seen me with my children for 15 years. Was I really that critical?" Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. "That's what's been bothering me about these conversations. The Emma I remember was a confident, happy child who adored you. She used to run over here sometimes just to tell me about something wonderful you'd done together, or some advice you'd given her that helped with a problem at school. Then why is she saying these things now?" I've been wondering the same thing. In my years as a social worker, I learned that sometimes when people are struggling in their present lives, they can reinterpret their past through that lens of pain. It doesn't mean the memories are false, exactly, but they might be colored by current difficulties. The kettle whistled, and Ruth got up to make the tea. As she poured the hot water, she continued, "Has Emma been going through anything particularly challenging lately? Problems at work, in relationships, financial stress?" I thought about Emma's recent job change, her breakup 6 months ago, her struggle to find direction in her career. "She's been having a difficult time. She moved back home briefly last year, and I could tell she was unhappy. But she didn't want to talk about it much. Sometimes therapy can bring up old hurts, but it can also create new interpretations of old events," Ruth said gently. "I'm not saying Emma's feelings aren't valid, but the mother she's describing to me doesn't match the one I've observed all these years." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. But if that's true, then what do I do? How do I help her if she believes I hurt her? Ruth sat back down and pushed a steaming cup toward me. That's the difficult part. You can't force someone to see their memories differently. But you can try to understand what pain she's carrying now that's making her interpret the past this way. I sipped the tea, grateful for its warmth. She won't even talk to me, Ruth. She's staying with David now, and she can barely look at me. Give her some time, and maybe, when she's ready, you could ask her to help you understand specific moments that felt hurtful to her. Not to defend yourself, but to really listen and try to see things from her perspective. As we sat in Ruth's quiet kitchen, I felt some of the panic from the morning beginning to settle into a different kind of worry. Maybe Emma wasn't lost to me forever. Maybe this was something we could work through together. But when I returned home and found David waiting with another document from Emma's room, his face pale and serious, I realized the situation was far more complicated than either Ruth or I had imagined. "Mom," David said, holding up what looked like a letter. "You need to see this. Emma wasn't just talking to her therapist about the past. She's been planning something, and I think we're running out of time." The late afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor as I stared at the letter in David's hands. My tea from Ruth's house had gone cold during the drive home, but my mouth felt too dry to swallow anyway. The familiar comfort of my own kitchen, with its mismatched chairs and the small herb garden visible through the window, suddenly felt foreign and unsafe. "What kind of letter?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. I set my purse down on the counter with trembling fingers, the leather strap slipping from my grasp. David's face had lost all color, making the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in days, his usually neat hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "It's addressed to Emma's old college roommate. She never sent it, but Mom, the things she wrote about us, about our family." He trailed off, his voice catching. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the same chair where I'd helped both my children with homework for years, where we'd shared countless breakfast conversations about their days ahead. Now it felt like sitting in the ruins of everything I thought I knew about our family. "Read it to me," I said quietly, then immediately changed my mind. "No, wait, I should read it myself." David hesitated, glancing toward the stairs that led to Emma's old room. "She might come back for more of her things. I don't think she knows I found this." The house felt unnaturally quiet around us. Usually, I found peace in the afternoon stillness, but today it seemed heavy with secrets and unspoken accusations. The refrigerator hummed in the background, and somewhere upstairs, the old heating pipes made their familiar, settling sounds. Normal life continuing while my world shifted beneath my feet. "Where exactly did you find it?" I asked. "Tucked inside one of her old textbooks. I was packing them into boxes like she asked." David ran his hand through his hair again, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "I wouldn't have looked, but the envelope fell out and I saw the date. She wrote this 3 months ago, right around the time she started therapy." 3 months ago? I tried to remember what had been happening in Emma's life then, what our interactions had been like. She'd been living in her apartment across town, working at the marketing firm she didn't particularly enjoy. We'd had dinner together maybe twice that month, conversations that seemed normal at the time, but now felt loaded with hidden meaning. "David, I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, looking directly at him. Do you remember me being cruel to Emma when you were growing up? Am I missing something about my own behavior?" He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the letter still clutched in his hands. For a long moment, he was quiet, his brow furrowed in concentration. This was the same expression he'd worn as a child when working through difficult math problems, determined to find the right answer. "You weren't cruel," he said finally, "but you were intense sometimes. Especially with Emma. You had higher expectations for her, and you didn't hide your disappointment when she didn't meet them." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay still and listen. "What do you mean? Remember when she quit piano lessons in 8th grade? You didn't speak to her for 2 days. And when she changed her major from pre-med to communications, you made comments about her wasting her potential for months afterward." Each memory he mentioned landed with painful clarity. I remembered those moments, but in my recollection, I had been trying to guide Emma toward her best self, to push her to achieve what I knew she was capable of. I thought I was being a good mother, encouraging her to reach higher. "I know you did," David said gently. "And it worked, in a way. Emma is accomplished. She's smart. She's capable. But she also spent most of high school and college trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't trying to meet your expectations." I stared out the kitchen window at the small garden where Emma used to help me plant tomatoes every spring. She'd been so careful with the seedlings, worried about hurting their delicate roots. When had I stopped seeing that careful, sensitive side of her and started focusing only on what I thought she should become? "But David, that doesn't make me abusive," I said, hearing the defensiveness creep into my voice despite my efforts to stay open. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But maybe to Emma it felt like nothing she did was ever good enough. Maybe that's what she's working through in therapy." The sound of a car door slamming outside made us both freeze. Through the kitchen window, I could see Emma's blue Honda parked in the driveway, and Emma herself walking toward the front door with her purposeful stride. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her keys like a weapon. "She's here," David whispered, quickly folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. "What do we do?" I heard Emma's key in the front door, followed by her footsteps in the hallway. My heart raced as I realized this might be my chance to start a real conversation with her, to begin understanding how she'd experienced her childhood. But it might also be the moment everything fell apart completely. "Emma?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and welcoming. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair pulled back severely and her expression guarded. She looked so much like me at her age, but there was a hardness in her eyes that I didn't remember ever having. Or maybe I'd simply never seen myself clearly. "I just came to get a few more things," she said without making eye contact. "I'll be out of your way soon." "Emma, please," I said, standing up from the table. "Can we talk?" "I spoke with Ruth this afternoon, and I'm trying to understand." "You talked to Ruth about me?" Emma's voice rose sharply, and her face flushed with anger. "You talked to Ruth about what I've been saying in therapy?" The question hung in the air between us like a live wire. I realized too late that going to Ruth, even innocent Ruth who'd been like family to us, might seem like another betrayal to Emma. Another example of me trying to control the narrative instead of simply listening to her pain. David cleared his throat nervously. "Emma, maybe we could all sit down and—" "No," Emma said firmly, her eyes now blazing as she looked between her brother and me. "I knew this would happen. I knew you'd try to turn everyone against me, make me look like the crazy one." She pulled something out of her purse, a thick manila envelope, and my stomach dropped as I wondered what other secrets were about to be revealed. Whatever was in that envelope, whatever Emma had been planning, I could see from her expression that there would be no going back after this moment. Emma held the envelope against her chest like a shield, her breathing shallow and rapid. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had moved inward while we weren't looking. "Emma, please," I said, taking a small step toward her. "I didn't go to Ruth to turn anyone against you. I went because I was confused and hurting, and I needed to understand what I might have done wrong." "What you might have done wrong?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "You still don't get it, do you? Even now you're making it about your confusion? You're hurt." David stood up slowly, his hands visible and open. "Emma, we're trying to understand. Really trying. But can you help us see what we're missing?" Emma's eyes darted between us, and I could see her calculating, deciding how much to reveal. The envelope crinkled as her grip tightened. "This," she said, lifting the envelope slightly, "is why I came here today. Not to have another conversation where you gaslight me into thinking my memories are wrong." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What is that?" "Letters," Emma said simply. "Letters I wrote to myself when I was younger. My therapist suggested I go through my old things, and I found them in a box in my closet at the apartment. The apartment, the one she'd been staying in since she moved out 3 months ago, taking only her immediate necessities and leaving behind years of accumulated belongings. I'd wondered when she'd come back for the rest. "Letters you wrote to yourself?" David asked gently. Emma nodded, and for the first time since she'd walked in, some of the hardness left her expression. "I started writing them when I was about 12. Whenever something happened that made me feel invisible or not good enough. I'd write myself a letter, trying to figure out why I felt so empty all the time. The words hit me like a physical blow. Invisible. Empty. At 12 years old, my daughter had felt invisible in her own home. Can you... I swallowed hard. "Can you tell us what the letters say?" Emma studied my face for a long moment. "Are you sure you want to know? Because once I read these, once you hear how I experienced my childhood, you can't unhear it. You can't go back to believing you were just a normal mom doing her best." David moved closer to the table, pulling out a chair. "Maybe we should all sit down for this." "No," Emma said quickly. "I need to be able to leave if this gets too hard." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of folded papers, some written on lined notebook paper, others on stationery with little flowers around the borders. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded the first one. "This one is from when I was 13, she said, her voice becoming smaller. "Dear Emma, today Mom asked me about the science fair project again. When I told her about my volcano idea, she got that look. You know the look. The one that says what I'm saying is stupid without her having to say it. Then she started telling me about how David won second place with his solar system model when he was my age, and maybe I should try something more challenging." I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered that conversation, but I remembered it differently. I thought I'd been encouraging her to push herself, to not settle for something too easy. "Emma, I was trying to—" "Please," Emma interrupted, looking up from the letter. "Just let me read them. That's all I can handle right now." David caught my eye and shook his head slightly. "Listen first," his expression seemed to say. "Talk later." Emma unfolded another paper. "This one's from when I was 15. Dear Emma, I got an A- on my history paper today. When I told Mom, she asked what I got wrong to lose the plus. When I explained that the teacher said my analysis was really good but I had a few citation errors, she said that attention to detail was what separated good students from great ones. David never had problems with citation format. Each word felt like a small knife. I had said that. I remembered saying that, remembered thinking I was teaching her about excellence, about not accepting mediocrity. There's about 40 of these letters, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. 40 times I felt small enough that I had to write myself a letter, to remember that my feelings mattered. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own rapid breathing. David sat down heavily in his chair, his face pale. "Emma?" David said quietly. "I had no idea. I never realized that Mom comparing us made you feel that way." "Of course you didn't," Emma said, but without malice. "You are the golden child, the standard I could never meet. And before you start feeling guilty about that, it wasn't your fault. You didn't ask to be perfect." I wanted to protest, to explain that I'd never meant for her to feel that way, that I'd loved both my children equally. But looking at Emma now, seeing the pain she'd carried for so many years, I realized that my intentions mattered less than the impact I'd had. "I need to ask you something," Emma said, looking directly at me for the first time since she'd arrived. "And I need you to be honest." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "When you think about my childhood, do you remember being proud of me? Not proud of my achievements or my grades or how I made you look as a mother, but proud of me, of who I was as a person." The question hung in the air like a test I was destined to fail. Because as I searched my memory, trying to find moments where I'd celebrated Emma simply for being Emma, I realized that most of my pride had indeed been tied to her accomplishments, her behavior, her ability to meet my expectations. I started, then stopped. The truth was too terrible and too important to rush. Emma nodded, as if my hesitation had already given her the answer she'd expected. She began folding the letters back up, slipping them into the envelope. "That's what I thought," she said softly. "That's why I need time away from this family. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to earn love I'm never going to get." She turned toward the door, and panic rose in my throat. "Emma, wait," I called out. "What if I said yes? What if I said I could remember being proud of you just for being you? Would that change anything?" Emma stopped, but didn't turn around. "Only if it was true," she said, "and we both know it's not." The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a gunshot. I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the space where Emma had been, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. "Mom," David said softly, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't bear to see my failure reflected in his eyes, too. The silence stretched between us until I heard footsteps on the stairs. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face grave. She must have heard everything from upstairs. "How long were you listening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough," she said, settling into the chair Emma had vacated. "Long enough to recognize myself in some of those letters?" I finally turned to look at her, confused. "What do you mean?" My mother folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring catching the light. "Do you remember what I used to say to you when you brought home a test with a B+ on it?" The memory surfaced unbidden. "You'd ask why it wasn't an A. And when you got an A, you'd ask why it wasn't an A+. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. David shifted in his chair. "Grandma, you did that to Mom too?" "I thought I was helping," my mother said quietly. "I thought I was preparing her for a world that wouldn't accept anything less than perfection." Sound familiar? The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank into my chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I became you, I whispered. You became me, she confirmed. And I became my mother, and she probably became hers. It's a legacy none of us meant to pass down, but we did it anyway. David leaned forward, his elbows on the table. So, what happens now? Emma's gone. She doesn't want to see us for who knows how long. And Mom's just supposed to accept that she messed up her daughter for life? I don't know, I admitted, the words feeling strange in my mouth. I was used to having answers, to having plans. I keep trying to remember moments when I was proud of Emma just for being Emma, and I can't find them. How is that possible? How can a mother not remember being proud of her child? Because you were looking for the wrong things, my mother said. I did the same thing with you. I was so focused on molding you into what I thought you should be that I missed celebrating who you already were. I thought about Emma as a little girl, always trying so hard to please me. How she'd clean her room without being asked, and then hover nearby, waiting for me to notice. How she'd bring me drawings from school, and I'd automatically point out that she'd colored outside the lines, instead of seeing the joy she'd put into creating something for me. She used to sing, I said suddenly. When she was maybe 7 or 8, she'd make up these elaborate songs about everything. About the cat, about her breakfast, about the rain. They were beautiful and silly and completely her own. David smiled. I remember that. She'd turn everything into a musical. I told her to stop, I continued, the memory now crystal clear. I said it was disruptive, that she needed to focus on more important things. She stopped singing after that. The kitchen fell silent again. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, marking time that felt suddenly precious and irretrievable. I killed her joy, I whispered. I took a bright, creative, loving little girl, and I trained it out of her because it didn't fit my idea of success. My mother reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You did what you thought was right with the tools you had. Just like I did. Just like my mother did. But Emma's not gone forever. She's giving you a gift. A gift? I looked at her incredulously. She hates me. She's giving you the truth, my mother said firmly. And the chance to change. That's more than I ever gave you. By the time I realized what I'd done, you were already doing it to your own children. David had been quiet, but now he spoke up. Mom, I need to tell you something too. My heart clenched. What? I always felt guilty about being the one you were proud of. I knew you compared us, and I hated it. But I was too selfish to say anything because I liked being the favorite. David, you were just a child. I was old enough to know it was wrong, he interrupted. I was old enough to defend my sister, and I didn't. I let her absorb all your criticism because it meant less for me. I looked at my son, seeing the weight he'd been carrying, and realized that my approach hadn't just damaged Emma. It had damaged both of my children in different ways. So, what do we do now? I asked, feeling more lost than I had since my husband died. My mother squeezed my hand. We start by admitting we were wrong, really wrong. Not just making excuses or explaining our intentions, but owning the damage we caused. And then? Then we figure out how to do better, even if Emma doesn't want to hear it right now. David pulled out his phone and stared at it for a moment. She's not answering my texts, he said. But I'm going to keep trying. Not to convince her to forgive us, but to let her know that we heard her. Really heard her. I nodded, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix something or manage an outcome. I was just sitting with the terrible truth of what I'd done. But as I sat there, surrounded by the ruins of my relationship with my daughter, I realized something else. Emma had found her voice. Despite everything I'd done to silence her, she'd found the strength to speak her truth. Maybe I'd failed her in every way that mattered when she was growing up. But somehow, she'd survived me. She'd become strong enough to fight back. The question now was whether I could become strong enough to deserve her forgiveness. My phone buzzed with a text message, and my heart leapt thinking it might be Emma. But when I looked at the screen, I saw it was from someone I didn't recognize. The message was short and confusing. "We need to talk about Emma. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Riverside Park. Come alone." I stared at the mysterious text message, my hands trembling slightly. The words blurred as I read them again. "We need to talk about Emma. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Riverside Park. Come alone." "What is it?" David asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the phone, watching his brow furrow as he read. "Do you recognize the number?" "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But whoever it is knows about Emma and what's happening." My mother leaned over to look at the screen, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "That's strange. Who else would know about the therapy situation?" The three of us sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Outside, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across my living room, turning the familiar space into something that felt foreign and unsettling. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me now, all those forced smiles hiding years of pain I'd been too blind to see. "Maybe it's someone from Emma's life," David suggested hesitantly. "A friend who wants to help mediate?" I shook my head, remembering the restrictions I'd imposed. "I don't know who Emma's friends are. I never made an effort to know them." The admission burned in my throat like acid. How had I become a mother who didn't know her own daughter's friends? My mother set down her teacup with a gentle clink against the saucer. "Margaret, you can't go to this meeting. It could be anyone. What if it's some kind of setup?" "A setup for what?" I asked, though my mind was already spinning with possibilities, none of them good. "I don't know," she admitted, "but meeting a stranger alone when you're emotionally vulnerable isn't wise." David stood up and began pacing between the coffee table and the window, a habit he'd inherited from his father. "What if it's someone who can help us understand what Emma's going through? What if they have information we need?" The desperation in his voice mirrored my own thoughts. I was grasping at any possibility that might bring Emma back into our lives, even if it meant walking into an uncertain situation. "Or what if it's someone who wants to make things worse?" my mother countered, her protective instincts sharp despite her earlier criticism of my parenting. "Margaret, you're not thinking clearly right now." I looked at the phone again, as if the mysterious message might reveal more if I stared hard enough. The number was local, but that told me nothing. Riverside Park was public, safe in daylight, but the request to come alone sent warning bells through my head. "I have to go," I said finally, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Mom, no," David said, stopping mid-pace. "Grandma's right. This feels wrong." "Everything feels wrong right now," I replied, standing up and walking to the window. The street looked normal. Neighbors coming home from work, kids riding bikes on the sidewalk. But my world had tilted off its axis, and nothing felt stable anymore. "My daughter won't speak to me. She's telling a therapist that I abused her. Someone out there knows about our family crisis and wants to meet me secretly. Nothing about any of this is right." My mother joined me at the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass beside mine. That's exactly why you shouldn't go alone. If you're determined to meet this person, take David with you. The message said to come alone, I pointed out. Then maybe that's your answer right there, David said. People with good intentions don't usually make demands like that. I turned away from the window and looked at my son and mother. These two people who were standing by me even after I'd admitted to failing so completely. David's face was etched with worry, and I could see him struggling between wanting to support me and wanting to protect me. My mother's expression was harder to read, but I recognized the set of her jaw. She was preparing for a fight. What if this person has been talking to Emma? I asked. What if they know something about how she's really doing, or what she needs from us? Or what if there's someone who wants to hurt you because they think you're a child abuser? My mother shot back. Margaret, you're not considering all the possibilities here. The word abuser hung in the air like smoke, choking us all. I sank back into my chair, the weight of that label crushing me. Was that what I was? Was that how the world would see me if Emma's version of our story got out? I can't just ignore this, I said, my voice cracking. What if it's my only chance to understand what Emma's going through? What if this person can tell me how to fix things? David sat down across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Mom, you can't fix this by meeting with some stranger. You can only fix it by dealing with Emma directly, and she's not ready for that yet. But what if she sent this person? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, revealing the desperate hope I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. My mother and David exchanged a look that told me they'd already considered and dismissed this possibility. Emma's not playing games, David said gently. When she's ready to communicate, she'll do it directly. This doesn't feel like her. The rational part of my brain knew they were right, but the terrified, guilt-ridden part of me was willing to grasp at any straw, no matter how dangerous it might be. As evening settled around us, I found myself staring at that text message over and over, counting down the hours until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Every instinct told me not to go, but something deeper, more desperate, was already planning the route to Riverside Park. Just as I was about to put the phone away, it buzzed again. Another message from the same number. Don't bring anyone else. This is about more than you know. I read the second message aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room, making the threat feel even more real. That's it, my mother said, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. You're not going anywhere near that park tomorrow. Mom's right, David said, taking the phone from my hands. This person is trying to manipulate you. Look at these messages. They're designed to make you feel like you have no choice. I wanted to argue, but the fear in their voices was starting to penetrate the fog of desperation that had been clouding my judgment. What if they know something about Emma that we don't? What if she's in some kind of trouble? Then they should be talking to the police, not sending cryptic messages to you, my mother replied. Margaret, I've seen this kind of thing before. Someone hears about a family situation and decides they know better than everyone else how to fix it. David was scrolling through the messages, his frown deepening. The timing bothers me too. Right after Emma starts therapy, suddenly someone wants to meet with you secretly. It feels connected somehow. The thought sent a chill through me. You think someone from Emma's therapy is behind this? I don't know, David said. But I think we need to consider all the possibilities. and none of them are good. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows like the house itself was nervous. "What would your father have done?" my mother asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. My father had been gone for 5 years now, but his steady presence still felt like something I could reach for in moments like this. He would have said that good people don't operate in shadows. "Exactly," she said. He always believed that the right thing to do was usually the straightforward thing to do. David looked up from the phone. "So we don't go. We ignore the messages and focus on what we can actually control." But even as I nodded agreement, another part of me was calculating. The park was only 20 minutes away. I could be there and back before anyone realized I was gone. The possibility that this mysterious person might have answers about Emma gnawed at me like a physical ache. "I'm going to make some tea," I said, needing to move, to think. In the kitchen, I found myself staring out the window toward the direction of Riverside Park. The rational arguments my mother and David had made seemed less convincing when I was alone with my guilt and fear. What if Emma was reaching out indirectly because she couldn't face talking to me directly? What if I was missing my only chance to understand what I'd done wrong? "You're still thinking about going, aren't you?" David's voice made me jump. He'd followed me into the kitchen and was leaning against the doorframe, watching me with that knowing expression he'd inherited from his father. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted. "What if it really is about Emma? What if she needs help, and this is the only way someone can tell us?" David moved closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Mom, Emma is an adult. If she needed help, she has ways to get it that don't involve sending mysterious strangers to meet her mother in secluded places." The kettle whistled, giving me something to do with my shaking hands. As I poured the hot water over the tea bags, David continued. "Remember when I was 16 and got into that trouble at school? You didn't try to fix it by meeting with random people who claimed to know what was best for me. You dealt with it directly, even when it was hard." "This is different," I said. "You were talking to me then. Emma won't even take my calls." But forcing a conversation through some stranger isn't going to change that. It might make things worse. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. "David's right, sweetheart. Emma needs to come to you when she's ready, not when someone else decides she should." I carried the tea tray back to the living room, my mind still churning. As we settled back into our chairs, my phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was different. 2 p.m. tomorrow. Don't disappoint Emma again." The words hit me like a physical blow. David reached for the phone, but I held it away from him, reading the message over and over. "What does it say?" my mother asked. When I told them, the room fell completely silent. The manipulation was so obvious, so cruel, that it cut through my desperation like a knife. "Now we know this isn't from Emma," David said quietly. "She would never use your guilt against you like that." But as I sat there, staring at those words, I realized that whoever was behind these messages understood exactly what would drive me to that park tomorrow. And despite everything my family had said, despite every rational argument against it, I could feel my resolve weakening with each passing hour. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words, "Don't disappoint Emma again." The phrase echoed through my mind, each repetition like a twist of the knife. By 5 in the morning, I gave up pretending to rest and padded downstairs to make coffee. David was already in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and I realized he hadn't slept either. "You stayed up all night," I said, more statement than question. He nodded, pouring himself a cup from the pot he'd already made. I kept thinking about that last message. Whoever sent it knows exactly what buttons to push. We sat in the pre-dawn darkness, neither of us turning on the overhead light. The kitchen felt safer somehow in the dim glow from the stove's clock. "I keep going back to Emma's last words to me," I said finally. "She said I never really listened to her, that I was always too busy fixing things to hear what she was actually saying. What if she's right? What if this is her way of making me finally pay attention?" David set down his mug harder than necessary. "Mom, Emma wouldn't manipulate you like this. She's angry, yes, but she's not cruel. But what if it's not Emma directly? What if someone is helping her because she can't bring herself to reach out?" "Then they're doing it wrong," David said firmly. "Anyone who really cared about Emma wouldn't put you through this psychological torture." When my mother appeared an hour later, she found us both staring into our coffee cups like they held answers. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, taking in my rumpled pajamas and hollow eyes. "You look terrible." "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted. "That message last night, it felt like Emma's voice, like something she might actually think." My mother pulled out a chair between David and me. "Tell me exactly what you're feeling right now. Not what you think you should feel, but what's really in your heart." I closed my eyes, trying to untangle the knot of emotions in my chest. "I'm terrified that Emma really believes I disappointed her over and over again. I'm terrified that I'm such a terrible mother that I don't even remember the damage I caused. And I'm terrified that if I don't go to that park, I'll lose any chance of understanding what went wrong." "And if you do go?" David asked quietly. "I'm terrified of that too," I whispered. "What if it's not about Emma at all? What if someone is using my guilt to hurt me? What if I'm walking into something dangerous because I'm too desperate to think clearly?" The three of us sat in silence as the sun began to filter through the kitchen windows. Finally, my mother spoke. "Sarah, do you remember when Emma was 12 and she lied about finishing her science project? You found out the night before it was due." I nodded, remembering. She was so angry when I made her stay up and complete it. She said I was being mean, that other parents would have just let her face the consequences. "But you didn't let her fail," my mother continued. "You stayed up with her, helped her gather materials, drove to 3 different stores to find what she needed. You didn't do the work for her, but you made sure she had what she needed to succeed." She was still angry the next morning, I recalled. Said I had embarrassed her by making such a big deal about it. David leaned forward. "But Mom, she got an A on that project, and more importantly, she never procrastinated like that again. She learned." "The point is," my mother said gently, "you made the hard choice. You did what was best for Emma even when she couldn't see it, even when it made her temporarily angry with you. That's what good mothers do." I felt tears start to fall. But what if I made too many hard choices? What if I was so focused on teaching her responsibility that I forgot to just love her? "Oh, honey," my mother reached for my hand. "Love isn't just acceptance. Love is caring enough to guide someone even when they resist. Emma may not have appreciated it then, but she knew she was loved." My phone buzzed on the counter. We all froze, staring at it like it might explode. David reached for it first. "It's another message," he said grimly. "Do you want me to read it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. 1 hour until the meeting. Emma is waiting for your answer. The words sent a chill through me. It was 1 p.m. Somehow, the entire morning had slipped away while we talked. The decision I'd been agonizing over for days had suddenly become immediate and urgent. David was already shaking his head. Mom, no, this is escalating too quickly. Real situations don't have these kinds of dramatic deadlines. But as I stared at the phone, all my rational thoughts scattered. In 1 hour, I could have answers. In 1 hour, I might finally understand what I had done wrong and how to fix it. The pull was so strong it felt like a physical force drawing me toward the door. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the kitchen floor. The sound was harsh in the sudden silence, and both David and my mother looked up at me with alarm. I have to go, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering what she wanted to tell me. What if this is my only chance? Sarah, please. David's voice carried a note of desperation I'd rarely heard from him. Think about what you're saying. Emma wouldn't set ultimatums like this. She's never been manipulative. But even as he spoke, I was already moving toward the hallway where I'd left my purse. My hands shook as I fumbled for my car keys, and I could hear my mother's chair creaking as she stood to follow me. Honey, wait, she called. If you're determined to do this, at least let us come with you. I turned back to face them both, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. No, the message was clear. Emma wants to see me alone. If I show up with both of you, she might leave before I get any answers. The living room felt smaller than usual, crowded with our collective anxiety. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting everything in a golden haze that seemed surreal given the circumstances. This was my home, the place where I'd raised both my children, where we'd had countless family dinners and movie nights. How had we gotten to this point where everything felt so fractured? David moved to block the front door, not aggressively, but with the determined stance of someone who wasn't going to be easily moved. Mom, I'm begging you. Give me 5 minutes to think this through with you. 5 minutes. I stopped, keys clutched in my fist. The rational part of my mind knew he was right to be worried. Everything about this situation felt wrong, from the mysterious messages to the artificial deadline. But the mother in me, the part that had spent sleepless nights worrying about Emma since the day she was born, couldn't bear the thought of missing this opportunity. What if she's in trouble? I asked quietly. What if someone has convinced her that her childhood was worse than it actually was, and she's finally ready to hear my side of things? What if I don't go, and she interprets that as me not caring enough to fight for our relationship? My mother moved closer, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. When she reached me, she placed both hands on my shoulders, her touch gentle but firm. Sarah, listen to yourself. You're creating scenarios to justify something that feels wrong to all of us. But what if I'm wrong? My voice cracked on the words. What if my fear is keeping me from fixing the most important relationship in my life? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken fears and conflicting instincts. Through the front window, I could see our quiet neighborhood street, tree-lined and peaceful. Mrs. Henderson was tending her flower garden 2 houses down, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding in our living room. The normalcy of the scene made everything feel even more surreal. David's phone chimed, and we all jumped. He glanced down at it, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It's from the same number, he said slowly. But this message is addressed to me. My blood went cold. What does it say? He read aloud, his voice carefully controlled. David, your mother is being stubborn. Help her understand that Emma needs to see her today. This is important for both of them. The three of us stared at each other in the suddenly oppressive quiet of the living room. Even my mother had gone pale, her hands dropping from my shoulders. Now do you see? David asked quietly. Emma doesn't even know I exist as far as she's concerned. She's never texted me in her life, and she certainly wouldn't refer to you as your mother when talking to me. This isn't her, Mom. But instead of the relief I should have felt at this proof, a new wave of panic washed over me. Then who is it? And why are they pretending to be Emma? What do they want from me? The afternoon sun had shifted, and shadows were beginning to creep across the living room floor. What had started as a day full of difficult but hopeful possibilities was transforming into something much darker and more frightening. I sank down onto the couch, my legs suddenly unsteady. The leather felt cold against my skin, and I found myself gripping the armrest so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I don't understand any of this. Who would do something like this? And why? David sat across from me, still holding his phone like it might explode. I think we need to call the police, Mom. This isn't just weird anymore. Someone is impersonating Emma and trying to manipulate you into going somewhere alone. But what if it really is her? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, even though I knew how desperate they sounded. What if she gave someone else her phone? What if she's in some kind of trouble and can't reach out directly? My mother lowered herself into the chair beside me, her movements careful and deliberate. Sarah, honey, you heard what David said. Emma wouldn't refer to you as your mother when texting him. That's not how people talk to their siblings about their parents. I knew she was right. Deep down, beneath the maternal panic and desperate hope, I knew this wasn't Emma. But accepting that truth meant facing an even more frightening reality. Someone out there knew enough about our family situation to craft these messages. Someone knew about Emma's estrangement from me, knew about her therapy, knew how to push exactly the right buttons to make me consider walking into what could be a dangerous situation. How would they even know about the therapy? I asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at me. How would they know about our relationship problems? David leaned forward, his expression grim. Social media? Maybe Emma posted about it somewhere, or talked to friends who aren't as discreet as they should be. Or maybe this person knows Emma somehow, got information from her without her realizing how they'd use it. The thought of Emma unknowingly providing ammunition for someone to hurt me made my chest tighten with a familiar protective instinct. Despite everything between us, despite the accusations and the silence, she was still my daughter. The idea that someone might be exploiting her pain, or worse, putting her in danger too, was unbearable. We should try calling Emma directly, I said suddenly. Her real number. If someone else has been using her phone, or if she's in some kind of trouble, we need to know. My mother reached over and took my hand. And if she doesn't answer? Or if she hangs up when she realizes it's you? Then at least we'll know she's safe, and we'll know for certain that these messages aren't really from her. David was already scrolling through his contacts. I'll call her. She's more likely to pick up for me than for you. No offense. None taken. I watched as he found Emma's number and pressed call, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound of the ringing seemed to echo in the quiet room, each tone stretching into eternity. After what felt like forever, David's shoulders relaxed slightly. Emma? Hey, it's David. Yeah, I know it's been a while. Listen, this might sound strange, but have you been texting Mom today? I couldn't hear Emma's response, but I watched David's face carefully for any clues. His eyebrows rose, and he glanced at me with something that looked like relief mixed with concern. No, she hasn't tried to reach you either. Emma, someone has been sending Mom text messages claiming to be you, trying to get her to meet somewhere. Do you still have your phone? Has anyone else had access to it recently? The conversation continued for several more minutes, with David asking careful questions and occasionally responding with, okay, or, I see. Finally, he said, yeah, we're going to report it. You should probably do the same, just in case. And Emma? Maybe we could all talk sometime soon. Not about this stuff, just in general. When he hung up, the silence felt different, less charged somehow, though still heavy with unanswered questions. She's fine, David said immediately, addressing my most pressing fear. She's been at work all day, and she has her phone with her. She definitely didn't send any messages to you. She seemed pretty freaked out that someone was impersonating her, actually. Said she'd contact her phone company and file a report. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a new wave of anxiety. So someone really is pretending to be her. But why? What could they possibly want from me? My mother squeezed my hand. That's exactly why we need to involve the authorities, Sarah. This isn't something you can figure out on your own, and it's not something you should have to handle alone. I looked around the room at these three people who had spent the afternoon trying to protect me from my own desperate hope and poor judgment. Without them, I probably would have driven to that coffee shop, walked right into whatever trap was waiting for me. The realization of how close I'd come to potentially serious danger made me shaky all over again. You're right, I said finally. All of you. I was so focused on the possibility of reconciling with Emma that I wasn't thinking clearly about the risks. David's phone buzzed again. We all froze, staring at it like a venomous snake. Same number? My mother asked quietly. He nodded, his jaw tight. Should I read it? Yes, but don't respond. Maybe if we see what they say when we don't show up, we'll get a better idea of what this is really about. David read the message silently first, his expression growing darker. Then he looked up at us. They're getting more aggressive. Sarah, you're disappointing your daughter by not showing up. Emma is very upset and may not give you another chance like this. The manipulation was so transparent now that I wondered how I'd ever considered these messages genuine. The real Emma, whatever her feelings about me, would never communicate this way. She was direct, sometimes brutally so, but never manipulative or artificially urgent. I'm calling the police, I said, reaching for my own phone. This has gone far enough. As I dialed, I caught David and my mother exchanging a look that seemed to communicate their shared relief. For the first time all day, I felt like I was making a decision based on wisdom, rather than desperation. The officer who answered was professional and reassuring. Yes, this type of impersonation was something they took seriously. Yes, I should save all the messages and avoid any contact with the number. Yes, they would file a report and investigate the source of the communications. When I hung up, the late afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, casting everything in warm, golden light. The crisis wasn't over, but it felt manageable now, contained within proper channels with proper authorities handling it. Thank you, I said to the room in general. All of you. I don't know what I would have done without you here to talk sense into me. My mother patted my knee. That's what family is for, honey. Sometimes we need other people to see clearly when our own emotions are clouding our judgment. And for the first time in months, sitting in my living room surrounded by people who cared enough to argue with me when I was making poor choices, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. not because of some artificial deadline or manipulative message, but because I remembered what it felt like to have support, to have people willing to protect me even from myself when necessary. Whatever happened with Emma, whenever she was ready to rebuild our relationship, I would be here. But I would also be smarter about protecting myself and recognizing the difference between genuine opportunities for reconciliation and elaborate deceptions designed to exploit a mother's love.